The breaking point. The Vexari Dominion had been at war with the Luren Collective for 17 galactic cycles. Their conflict spanned 12 star systems, engulfed 27 habitable worlds, and had claimed billions of lives. Both sides commanded vast technological capabilities and seemingly inexhaustible resources. It was a war of attrition, methodical, calculated, and devastatingly slow. Commander Erix Vorn of the Vexari Defense Initiative stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Indomitable Will, watching tactical displays monitor the latest stalemate with Luren forces at the Nexus 5 outpost. 17 years fighting the same enemy, using the same tactics, achieving the same results. Nothing. Status report. Vorn demanded, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of his growing frustration. Enemy forces maintaining defensive posture at coordinates Epsilon 9, replied his tactical officer. They've reinforced their ion cannon emplacements. We cannot breach their shields without sustaining critical damage. Vorn's facial ridges tightened. Another day, another deadlock. The war had become a complex dance of calculated moves and countermoves, with both sides too evenly matched to gain meaningful advantage. Military doctrine on both sides emphasized minimal casualty rates through predictable engagement protocols. A war fought through simulations and probability algorithms before a single shot was fired. Maintain observation distance. Continue scanning for weaknesses, Vorn ordered, turning away from the tactical display. That's when the proximity alert blared. Unknown vessel approaching at high velocity from Sector 7. The sensor officer's voice pitched higher than usual. Configuration: unknown. It's not Luran. A sleek vessel streaked past the Indomitable Will, maneuvering with a recklessness that violated every established battle protocol. Its hull gleamed with a metallic sheen unlike any alloy in the Vexari database. Hailing frequencies, Vorn ordered, bewildered by this third party's appearance in a restricted war zone. The communication officer worked frantically at her console. They're heading straight for the Luren defensive line. Vorn's eyes widened. That's suicide. No ship can. Before he could finish, the unknown vessel accelerated to attack velocity and opened fire on the Luren defenses. Not with the usual methodical targeting of shield generators or propulsion systems, standard tactics refined over thousands of years of interstellar warfare, but by unleashing every weapon simultaneously in a chaotic barrage that seemed to follow no discernible pattern. They'll be destroyed, Vorn muttered. But they weren't. The strange ship weaved through Luren defensive fire with impossible agility, taking hits that should have crippled it yet continuing its assault. It fired continuously, not preserving energy reserves as doctrine demanded. It targeted seemingly random points on Luren vessels, not the critical systems that every military strategist knew to prioritize. And incredibly, the Luren ships began to fall. What are we witnessing? Vorn's second-in-command whispered. The answer came moments later when the unknown vessel finally responded to their hails. A bipedal figure appeared on screen. 2 arms, 2 legs, a single head with 2 forward-facing eyes. A human, according to the recently updated Xenobiological database. Vexari vessel, this is Captain Elena Reyes of the Earth Defense Force ship Audacity. Apologies for the intrusion, but we heard you folks were having some trouble with these Luren bastards. Vorn could barely form a response. The human ship had just accomplished in minutes what Vexari battle groups couldn't achieve in months. Your tactics are unorthodox, he finally managed. The human captain laughed, a disconcerting sound to Vexari sensibilities. That's one way of putting it. Look, my government has authorized me to offer you a proposal. We've been watching this war from the sidelines since we achieved FTL travel 3 years ago. We think we can help end it. How? Vorn asked, unable to mask his skepticism. Captain Rice smiled. By fighting like humans. 6 galactic rotations later, Ambassador Teleseric stood before the Vexari High Command, advocating for what many considered unthinkable, an alliance with the humans, a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel within the current solar cycle. They lack refinement, General Dravix objected. Their ships are crude, their technology inferior. Yet one of their vessels dispatched 7 Luran warships without following a single established engagement protocol, Ambassador Serix countered. The Luran don't know how to defend against them because the humans don't fight according to any predictable pattern. Precisely my point, the general retorted. They're chaotic, unpredictable. Maybe that's exactly what we need after 17 years of tactical stalemate. Serix pressed. The humans call it asymmetrical warfare. Instead of matching strength against strength according to established doctrine, they exploit unexpected weaknesses through unconventional means. Supreme Commander Vor Talag, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. And if we were to accept this alliance, what do the humans propose? Ambassador Serix activated a holographic display showing Fleet Admiral Harrison Chen of the Earth Defense Force. Supreme Commander, the human began, my species has a long history of warfare. While your civilizations have refined space combat into an elegant, predictable science, we have retained what you might call a more primitive approach. We don't fight to minimize casualties or preserve resources. We fight to win, quickly and decisively. And how would you apply this philosophy to our conflict with the Luran? Vor Talag asked. Admiral Chen's expression hardened. Give us access to your intelligence data and 5 of your fastest ships as escorts. We'll show you in the Centauri Expanse. No one in Vexari High Command truly believed the humans could significantly impact a war that had reached such perfect equilibrium. They approved the joint operation primarily out of curiosity, a minor tactical experiment unlikely to shift the broader strategic landscape. Fleet Captain Joran Vex was assigned to oversee the human contingent. 3 Earth vessels designated Audacity, Defiance, and Intrepid. None possessed the firepower of a Vexari dreadnought or the defensive capabilities of a Luran fortress ship. Their technology was, by any objective measure, inferior. Yet Vex couldn't deny a growing sense of unease as he observed the human commanders planning their assault on the Luran outpost at Centauri Expanse, a heavily fortified position that had repelled 6 previous Vexari offensives. You intend to approach directly? Vex asked incredulously during the final briefing. The Luran defense grid will detect your ships the moment you exit hyperspace. Admiral Chen nodded. That's counting on it. But standard protocol dictates. We don't follow standard protocol, Captain. The human pointed to their battle plan. We're going to hit them hard where they least expect it, with everything we've got. And where is that? Vex asked. Everywhere. Chen replied with a smile that revealed too many teeth. Simultaneously, the Luran commanders at Centauri Expanse had 17 years of experience fighting the Vexari. They knew every tactic, every formation, every strategic approach their enemy might employ. Their defense systems were calibrated to counter Vexari attack patterns with near-perfect efficiency. They were wholly unprepared for the humans. The Earth vessels dropped out of hyperspace at point-blank range, a suicidal maneuver by conventional standards, and immediately split in 3 different directions. Instead of targeting shield generators or weapon systems, they fired indiscriminately, overwhelming sensor arrays with contradictory threat assessments. The Defiance launched what appeared to be mining drones toward the Luran station's communication array. The Luran, following established doctrine, diverted defensive fire to eliminate these presumed explosive devices, only to discover too late that they were decoys. Meanwhile, the Intrepid deployed actual explosives against the station's supposedly impenetrable ventral shield emitters. Most shocking to Vex, observing from a safe distance, was the human willingness to take damage. Where Vexari ships would withdraw to preserve structural integrity, once shields fell below 30%, the Earth vessels continued fighting with exposed hull breaches, rerouting power from life support to weapon systems. They're insane, his tactical officer whispered as they watched the Audacity deliberately collide with a Luran cruiser, using the kinetic impact to breach its hull before firing directly into the wound. 4 hours after the battle began, the Luren outpost at Centauri Expanse, a position that had held firm for 3 galactic cycles, transmitted surrender codes. Fleet Captain Vex could scarcely believe what he had witnessed. He opened a channel to Admiral Chen's vessel. "Your tactics violated every principle of modern space combat," Vex said, struggling to keep accusation from his tone. Chen's face appeared on screen, smudged with what Vex realized was the Admiral's own blood. The human was smiling. "That's precisely why they worked, Captain. Your war has been locked in stalemate because both sides fight by the same rules. We don't." Vex considered this. "The Luran will adapt. They will study your methods. By the time they figure out how to counter these tactics, we'll have switched to something entirely different," Chen replied. "That's the human way. We're unpredictable by design." For the first time in 17 years of endless war, Vex felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Asymmetrical warfare. Word of the Centauri Expanse victory spread through Vexari military channels with unprecedented speed. What had been intended as a minor tactical experiment had evolved into something far more significant, the first decisive breakthrough in a generation of warfare. The Luran response was equally swift. Their high command immediately dispatched reinforcements to key strategic positions, recalibrating defensive systems to account for the new human attack patterns. Their tactical analysts worked feverishly to develop countermeasures against these unorthodox methods. But this was precisely what Admiral Chen had anticipated. "They're preparing for what we did yesterday," he explained to the newly formed Joint Vexari-Human Strategic Council. "We won't be doing the same thing tomorrow." Supreme Commander Vor Talig, who had personally traveled to the front lines after the Centauri victory, studied the human with newfound respect. "What do you propose instead?" Chen activated a holographic display showing the Luren supply network. "While they're reinforcing their military installations against frontal assaults, we'll target their logistics chain, not the major hubs. They'll expect that, but the secondary transfer points they consider too insignificant to heavily defend." Vortalig's facial ridges furrowed. "Those are minimal strategic targets. The resource expenditure to attack them would exceed the tactical advantage gained." "By your traditional cost-benefit analysis, yes," Chen agreed. "But we're not trying to destroy their supplies. We're creating a pattern of psychological disruption. Small, unpredictable strikes across multiple sectors simultaneously, forcing them to defend everywhere at once." Captain Vex, who had been promoted to liaison officer between the human fleet and Vexari forces, recognized the brilliance of the strategy. "They'll be unable to concentrate their defensive resources effectively." "Exactly," Chen nodded. "And while they're scrambling to protect 1,000 minor targets, we'll be preparing for the real attack." The Luren Collective prided itself on logical, methodical approaches to warfare. Their tactical doctrine emphasized predictive modeling, anticipating enemy movements before they occurred and positioning defensive assets accordingly. For 17 years, this approach had perfectly countered Vexari strategy, resulting in the protracted stalemate. The humans, however, defied prediction. Over the next 15 standard days, joint human Vexari strike teams hit 37 separate Luran positions across 7 star systems. Each attack employed different tactics. Some used electromagnetic pulses to disable defenses. Others deployed physical projectiles instead of energy weapons. Still others utilized captured Luren communication codes to transmit false orders. No pattern emerged that Luren analysts could use to predict the next target or method of attack. For the first time in the long war, the collective found itself reacting rather than anticipating, a position wholly contrary to their strategic philosophy. The Luren military structure is hierarchical and centralized, Captain Vex observed during a debriefing with Chen. Each tactical adjustment requires approval through multiple command levels. "Which means delay," Chen replied, studying the latest intelligence reports. "And in that delay lies opportunity." The human admiral had identified something that generations of Vexari strategists had overlooked: the Luren's greatest strength, their methodical, consensus-based decision-making, could become their greatest weakness when confronted with an enemy operating on a fundamentally different timeline. "We're not playing the same game they are," Chen explained to Vex. "While they're still analyzing our last move, we're already 3 moves ahead." The Luran response came in the form of Tactical Overseer Galvis Ren, a veteran commander whose analytical brilliance had earned him legendary status within the collective. Ren had studied the human attack patterns and developed what he believed was an effective counter-strategy: adaptive defense grids capable of rapidly reconfiguring to meet unconventional assaults. His first opportunity to implement this strategy came at Proxima Station, a critical Luran communications hub connecting their frontline forces to high command. Intelligence indicated the station was the humans' next likely target, a prediction Ren had staked his reputation on. He was correct, but not in the way he anticipated. The human vessels approached Proxima Station directly, exactly as expected, but instead of attacking, they transmitted surrender codes. Luran protocol required authentication of surrender signals, even obviously false ones. During the milliseconds this authentication process required, the humans deployed a new weapon, nanoscopic infiltration drones that entered the station's atmospheric filtration system. These infiltrators didn't damage the station's critical systems. Instead, they temporarily disrupted life support just long enough to necessitate emergency protocols that briefly lowered defensive shields during atmospheric rebalancing. In that 6-second window, Vexari strike ships that had been hiding in Proxima's dense asteroid field launched their attack. Overseer Ren watched in disbelief as his supposedly impenetrable defense was breached not through superior firepower, but through exploitation of safety protocols. The humans hadn't defeated his tactical analysis. They'd simply changed the parameters of the engagement to render it irrelevant. Proxima Station fell in under 3 hours. The Vexari High Command, long accustomed to measuring progress in terms of years, struggled to process the rapid succession of victories. Systems that had been under Luran control for a decade returned to Vexari jurisdiction within days. Yet Admiral Chen remained unsatisfied. "We're winning battles, not the war," he told Vortala during a strategic review. "The Luran are learning, adapting. They're pulling forces back, consolidating around their core worlds." "Is that not advantageous?" Vortala asked. "We've reclaimed disputed territories without costly frontal assaults." Chen shook his head. "They're preparing for a prolonged defensive posture. If we allow them to establish that position, we'll find ourselves in another stalemate, just with different boundaries. What alternative do you suggest?" The human's expression hardened. "We need to strike at their central command while they're still off balance. Not just a military target, but the heart of their decision-making apparatus. We need to take Luran Prime." The chamber fell silent. Luran Prime wasn't merely a military headquarters. It was the collective's governmental center, protected by defense systems accumulated over centuries. No assault on the planet had ever succeeded, and few had been attempted given the astronomical casualties such an operation would incur. "Impossible," General Dravix declared. "Their orbital defense grid alone would require a fleet 3 times our combined strength to penetrate." "By conventional means, yes," Chen acknowledged. "But we're not going to attack their defenses. We're going to make them lower them voluntarily." "And how would you accomplish this miracle?" Dravix asked with undisguised skepticism. For the first time since their alliance began, Admiral Chen revealed the full extent of human ingenuity and their capacity for deception. The plan was audacious to the point of seeming suicidal. It required perfect coordination between human vessels and Vexari forces that had only recently learned to work together. Most critically, it depended on understanding the Luran psychological profile better than they understood themselves. Captain Vex found himself in command of a Vexari battle group designated as the operations linchpin. His vessels would appear to suffer catastrophic system failures during an initial feint toward Luran Prime, transmitting distress signals and false intelligence, indicating a much larger fleet was following. "The Luran will detect the ruse," Vex argued during the final briefing. Their sensors will reveal our true numbers. Not if they can't trust their sensors, Chen replied. He turned to his chief science officer, Dr. Patel. Explain. The human scientist activated a holographic display, showing a small cylindrical device. We've developed what we call a perception inhibitor. It doesn't jam sensors in the traditional sense that would immediately alert them to deception. Instead, it introduces subtle inconsistencies in data readings, creating uncertainty rather than blindness. Vex studied the device skeptically. And this will confuse systems designed with redundant verification protocols. It's not targeting their systems, Patel clarified. It's targeting their methodology. The Lurin verification process involves cross-referencing multiple data sources to establish consensus. We're ensuring each source reports slightly different information, all plausible, none definitive. The brilliance of the approach struck Vex immediately. The Luran would follow protocol, seeking additional verification before acting, creating precious minutes of hesitation. In those minutes of uncertainty, Chen continued, we'll have positioned our actual attack force, not against their orbital defenses, but at these specific coordinates. He highlighted several seemingly random points in Lurin Prime's upper atmosphere. Those aren't military targets, Vortalig observed. No, Chen agreed. They're weather control substations. The Luran used them to maintain optimal atmospheric conditions over their major cities. Understanding dawned on Vex. If we seize control of those stations, we don't need to destroy their defenses, Chen finished. We just need to threaten what they value most, stability. The 5-hour endgame. The Luran Collective had ruled its region of space through perfect order for millennia. Their society functioned with clockwork precision, each individual component operating in harmony with the greater whole. This principle extended to their military doctrine, their diplomatic relations, and most fundamentally, to the environmental conditions they maintained on their homeworld. Luran Prime's atmosphere was regulated to the molecule, its temperature controlled to the 10th of a degree, its weather patterns scheduled seasons in advance. This wasn't merely preference. The Luran physiology required specific atmospheric compositions that had been optimized over generations of environmental engineering. Admiral Chen had identified this dependency not as a technological vulnerability, but as a psychological one. The joint Vexeri human fleet assembled at the edge of the Luran home system, far enough from defensive sensors to avoid immediate detection. Captain Vex's battle group departed first, their ships modified to emit radiation signatures suggesting a force 3 times their actual size. Remember, Chen reminded Vex during their final communication, your objective isn't to engage their defenses. It's to draw attention, create confusion, and hold position just long enough for Phase 2. Vex acknowledged the order, though he couldn't entirely suppress his anxiety. The Luran home fleet outnumbered his forces 10-1. If the human strategy failed, his ships would be annihilated within minutes. All vessels, advance to coordinates Alpha, Vex commanded. Deploy perception inhibitors on my mark. His battle group accelerated toward Luran Prime, broadcasting standard Vexeri combat formations. The Luran response was immediate. Defensive platforms activated, planetary shields strengthened, interceptor squadrons deployed. Perception inhibitors active, Vex's tactical officer reported. Generating false signatures. Now. The effect was subtle but profound. Luran sensor arrays detected Vex's approaching force, but each system reported slightly different information. Varying ship counts, contradictory weapon signatures, inconsistent energy readings. None of the discrepancies were large enough to trigger immediate alarm, but collectively they created a miasma of uncertainty. Following protocol, Luran commanders sought verification, ordering additional scans and cross-referencing data points, a process that typically required 7 to 12 minutes to achieve consensus. They had just given Admiral Chen's infiltration team exactly what they needed: time. While Luran attention focused on Vex's approaching battle group, 3 human vessels utilizing experimental stealth technology descended through a calculated blind spot in the planetary defense grid. These weren't warships but modified atmospheric insertion craft carrying small teams of Earth's most elite soldiers. Commander Sofia Rodriguez led the primary insertion team, her craft skimming the upper atmosphere at hypersonic velocity. Their target, Central Climate Regulation Facility 7, one of 16 automated stations controlling Lyran Prime's weather patterns. Approaching drop zone, her pilot announced. Atmospheric conditions nominal. Rodriguez checked her tactical display. The other two insertion teams were on course for their respective targets. Remember, she told her squad, minimal casualties. This isn't about destruction, it's about control. Their craft decelerated sharply, deploying thermoptic camouflage as it settled onto the facility's outer landing platform. No alarms sounded. The Lyran had never contemplated the possibility of terrestrial infiltration, while their attention focused on space-based threats. Rodriguez's team breached the facility's outer door using electromagnetic pulse devices that temporarily disabled security systems without triggering alerts. They moved through the station with precision born of hundreds of simulated runs, neutralizing the skeleton crew with non-lethal methods. Within 17 minutes, all 3 climate regulation facilities had been secured. Phase 2 complete, Rodriguez reported to the fleet, awaiting final authorization. In orbit above Lyran Prime, the situation had evolved exactly as Admiral Chen predicted. The Lyran, unable to reconcile their conflicting sensor data, had deployed additional defensive assets around Vex's battle group while continuing their verification processes. When the infiltration teams confirmed success, Chen transmitted directly to the Lyran High Command, a communication that, by protocol, they were required to acknowledge. The face of First Minister Tarn Vekos, supreme leader of the Lyran Collective, appeared on screen. His normally impassive features showed minute traces of concern, a significant display of emotion for his species. "Unknown vessel, identify yourself immediately," he demanded. Admiral Chen stood at relaxed attention. "First Minister Vekos, I am Fleet Admiral Harrison Chen of the Earth Defense Force, representing the Joint Human-Vexari Alliance. I'm contacting you to discuss terms of your surrender." The Lyran leader's expression didn't change, but the slight discoloration of his facial membrane indicated shock. "Your forces are significantly outnumbered, Admiral. Perhaps your intelligence is flawed." "My intelligence is quite accurate," Chen replied calmly. "And while I acknowledge your superior numbers, I should inform you that human operatives have seized control of atmospheric regulation facilities 7, 12, and 14. For the first time in recorded diplomatic history, a Lyran First Minister displayed visible alarm. "Impossible," Vekos breathed. "To demonstrate our control," Chen continued, "we will now increase oxygen concentration by 2% in the southeastern continental quadrant." He nodded to his communications officer, who transmitted the command to Rodriguez's team. Moments later, atmospheric sensors throughout the Lyran capital registered the change. A minor adjustment for most species, but a deeply distressing fluctuation for Lyran physiology. "This is barbaric," Vekos protested. "Threatening civilian atmospheric conditions violates every principle of civilized warfare." "I agree," Chen replied without hesitation, "which is why I'm offering you an alternative. Surrender now, and we guarantee no further atmospheric adjustments. Your people will be unharmed, and we can negotiate terms that preserve Lyran dignity while ending this war." Vekos's face became a rigid mask. "And if we refuse, then we will systematically adjust atmospheric composition across your major population centers, creating conditions that, while not lethal, will cause significant physiological discomfort to your citizens. We will continue these adjustments while our fleet engages your defensive forces, not to destroy them, but to prolong the engagement until your populace demands resolution." The psychological brilliance of the threat lay in its restraint. Chen wasn't offering destruction. He was offering instability, the one thing the Lyran civilization found more intolerable than defeat. For 17 minutes, the Luren High Command deliberated. Tactical assessments were made, options evaluated, consequences projected. In the end, they reached the only logical conclusion available. 5 hours and 23 minutes after the operation began, First Minister Vakos transmitted the Luren surrender codes. The formal surrender ceremony took place aboard the Vexari flagship Indomitable Will, the same vessel from which Commander Vorn had first witnessed human combat tactics months earlier. The symbolism was lost on no one present. Supreme Commander Vor Talag and Admiral Chen stood side by side as First Minister Vakos signed the peace accords, officially ending 17 years of intergalactic war. "You achieved in months what we couldn't accomplish in years," Vor Talag remarked quietly to Chen as the Luren delegation departed. "We had the advantage of fresh perspective," Chen replied. "Your forces had fought each other for so long that you've forgotten there were other ways to wage war, and other ways to win peace." Captain Vex, standing nearby, posed the question that had troubled him throughout the campaign. "Your tactics were effective, Admiral, but often involved significant risk. Were your superiors not concerned about potential casualties?" Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Earth has a long, bloody history of warfare, Captain. We've learned its costs all too well. The strategies we employed here weren't designed to maximize destruction, but to minimize it. We created the perception of unconventional threat, specifically to avoid the reality of conventional casualties. A psychological victory rather than a physical one," Vex observed. "Exactly. The most decisive victory isn't destroying your enemy's ability to fight. It's removing their desire to continue fighting." As the gathering dispersed, Commander Vorn approached Chen with a data tablet. "Admiral, our intelligence division has compiled this report on potential new threats emerging in the Outer Rim territories. Given your unique perspective, we would value your assessment." Chen accepted the tablet with a smile that Vorn had come to recognize as characteristically human, part determination, part anticipation. "Humanity is just getting started, Commander," Chen said, scanning the report. "And I suspect the rest of the galaxy hasn't seen anything yet." Throughout the vast expanse of space, news spread quickly. When humanity entered the war, victory had taken only 5 hours. But what few yet realized was that this wasn't merely the end of one conflict. It was the beginning of a fundamental shift in the balance of galactic power. Humanity had arrived on the interstellar stage, and the old rules no longer applied.